my heat off.
Hi, everybody. If you're just tuning in, you are listening live to the Angel Rock with your host. I am Lorilei Potvin. Just as I always tell you at the beginning of the show, if you want to watch the show, please head over to facebook.com. We've got UFO Paranormal Radio, the Facebook page. You can see it on my Facebook profile. We're also on Twitch. We're on Twitter, we're on LinkedIn, we're on YouTube, and that's the big thing. Come on over to YouTube too. Our main channel, the UFO Paranormal Radio channel, or United Public Radio Network, as we're called, or UPRN. If you've never been to the show, welcome. I do a show here with people from all walks of life, either through their extracurricular or their professional life. They're making a positive change for humanity. A little bit about myself. I am a Canadian psychic medium. I'm also crystal Reiki energy healer, Akashic Records practitioner, spiritual teacher and mentor, and a registered nurse. And tonight, one of your favorite guests, she's been on my show many times. I absolutely adore her. Varla Ventura. Now, if you haven't seen Varla before I say welcome, Varla, she's an author, very, very, very knowledgeable, especially when it comes to history, a lot of legend and lore. She's written books about, something's not showing up. That's okay. Sorry about that, guys. She's written many books about mermaids and fairies and vampires and werewolves and the absolute strange, the paranormal. Did I miss anything, Varla? Welcome.
I don't think so. Fairies, pukas, changelings, all the kind of like
Yes.
weird cryptid things like that. Yeah, I think ghosts, paranormal. I think we pretty much covered it all. All the weird things that go bump in the night. I like it. You like it.
Yes.
Everyone out there probably loves it. So yeah, we're all on the same page.
Well, that's the thing about the paranormal. Well, actually, I can't say I ever went looking for the paranormal. The paranormal found me. That's how I discovered that I had these gifts that I've had my whole life that I never realized about. But you know what the thing is? It's so isolating. I always said this, right? With the paranormal, it's not like you can walk up to somebody in the grocery store and say, hey, get any ghosts in your house, or talk about the paranormal. But when the subject comes up, people come out of the woodwork. What's your experience with that?
That's very true. And actually, one of the things I think, there've been shows like Coast to Coast that have been on for decades really now.
Yeah.
But I think that one of the gifts of having more and more ways for shows like yours to be on. So there's like, there's podcasts, there's live YouTube where people can like chat and connect with each other, as that we have grown as a community and people have been able to realize it's less isolating now than it's ever been. Because we can be very, very different people, but we can be kind of shared and united in these understandings and experiences that we have, like very, that there's something kind of uniting about not understanding the rest of the picture, or being having a shared unique experience, or just kind of wondering about what happens in the afterlife, or having these kind of very strange experiences, or if you want to even call them strange, or just sort of wondering, being part of that kind of unknown world. And it's very reassuring, because once upon a time when you pretty much just had like Fate magazine and hope that there were other weirdos out there like you, that's kind of why I started writing books, because I feel like that for me was very when I would read those stories and I knew other people were reading those stories or watching those shows, I knew there were other people that had those interests, and that was very reassuring to me to start to like meet those people. It's just you always hear that expression of like finding your people. And so I found, certainly since I started writing these types of books, sure, people have come out of the woodwork and been able to like, hey, I had this experience. But that's been really interesting to me, because sometimes people don't necessarily want to talk about it. Like they won't just like come out and say it.
Exactly.
But once you start the conversation, they'll have a very unique experience. And sometimes it's the last person you would expect.
Exactly.
Like it's someone you would never have that conversation with otherwise, or would bring that conversation or would bring that topic up. It might be like, I don't know, like your son's kindergarten teacher or someone that you just would like not expect would even want to have that conversation. It turns out like they're really interested in seances, or they have had, this recurring dream that they really want to talk about. I have to tell you something though, and I don't know if so the other night, right before, so I do a couple things before every interview, and I've I've been on like hundreds of interviews over the last 15 years or so. Right. And I always light candles. I never do an interview without candles. I just, you can't even see me most of the time. I actually used to never even do live video interviews. I kind of like got over the phobia of that about, I don't know, 5 or 6 years ago. Okay. And I always pull a card or two. And usually I just do that just for my own kind of centering or whatever. And every time I'm going to be on your show, or when I am going to be on Dell's show, I always get the high priestess or the priestess, and it's always you. I just think it's you. And so right before I was on Dell's show the other night, I totally pulled the high priestess, and I was like, Dell, I want you to tell Lord, this is the high.
He forgot to tell me.
Okay, well, you can go back and watch the footage. I was like, this is her. I want you to know. And so, of course, tonight I pulled just right before. I'm always scrambling at the last minute, but I was like, gotta pull this. Totally got the priestess. I knew I was going to, but it's still, you do your thing. It's just like pull the card that feels right. And I was like, yep. And it was the present card, because I usually just do like past, present, future, or sometimes just one card. And it was totally the present card. And I was like, knew I was going to pull that card because it's totally you.
You're going to have to tell for people that don't do tarot. I do some tarot, but I tend to not stick with the universal reading meanings. I kind of go with what the question is and what I'm seeing in the cards and what deck, but the traditional meaning of the high priestess for people that may not know.
Well, to me, the high priestess is like just this sort of, very magical, very, sort of witchy, but like in the sense of like just understanding like magic and the elements and having a command of those and being able to kind of like teach that to other people. And so
that would be me teaching.
Yeah, totally. And I always get that card whenever it's you.
So
and you should know,
crazy.
If it's still here. Is it here? Let's see. Is this it? Oh, yes, it is. Okay. And so I pull from I have many different decks, and I think I may have told you about this particular deck before, but this is actually the Thoth deck, which is the Aleister Crowley's deck. And I used to have a really cool story about this deck. So we just I'm showing the card. So this is just to encourage people.
It's if you've ever beautiful card
gone to, if you're not on the YouTube, it's, you're missing the picture, but what I'm showing is the picture of the card. And I used to never like this particular deck. I used to work with it a lot. Just with people who wrote about it as just like in an editorial capacity. And I just never I never really got it, just some decks you just don't get. And I want to just say, like, I'm not a super well-versed in the tarot. Like, I just know what I know when I pull it. And like, that's
how I am. That's like, how I am.
So if I can read it, it's because I look at it and I understand it. And that's like I learned mostly from my mom and from books. And my mom is like a way more advanced tarot reader than I am. So I was like, okay, I can't really read this deck. I don't know why. I just like never really quite got the deck. And then one day I was visiting my mom about, I don't know.
We're talking.
About 10 years ago. And she's like, well, do you want to check this deck out? And she hands me this deck. And it's the Aleister Crowley. I just call it the Aleister Crowley deck. I know that's not what it's called. It's called like the Thoth Tarot. But I like to call it the Aleister Crowley deck because I think it sounds better. So she hands me this deck, and it's in this like woolen little bag. And
hang on, did I lose my?
I hear you still.
Hang on one sec, Varla. I ended up unplugging you, moving this here. Go ahead. You know what I'm gonna have to do? I'll pop right back in. Just hang on one sec, okay?
Okay.
It's my fault because I grabbed that deck. Hang on, I lost your.
Okay. I think I'm here by
I'm so
myself.
sorry about
I
that.
think I was there by myself for a second.
I
I
guess
didn't
my
say anything. I
headphones
tried
have
not to say
decided
anything.
they're not going to let me use them anymore. Hang on. Go ahead. No, I guess we're not using them. Go ahead.
Oh, your headphones. Oh, yeah. I could hear you the whole time, actually. And you disappeared for a minute. And then now you're back.
That's I said. Hang on for 1 sec. I don't know why my audio has decided it's going to go crazy on me here. Okay, go ahead.
What deck did you just grab?
Oh, what I grabbed. Well, I was hearing about your story, but what I wanted to show everybody is, for example, okay, I don't use tarot. Is not my favorite deck. But when you were talking about how you just don't always connect with decks, okay, I have one deck like that. And it's actually computer generated crop circles. And when I got this, I think it's the Council of Seven deck or something. Okay. I got this deck and it was about 15 years ago. And I went, oh my God, what the heck is this? I'm not going to use this. And all of a sudden, over the last few years, I love this deck. I have connected.
Yeah,
the guy has seen all these crop circles. He's computer generated them on cards. And people ask me whenever I use it, oh my God, where'd you get that deck? It's not even in print anymore. But I hear what you're saying. It's the Arcturian Council of Seven deck. But I was going to say, this is the Supernatural deck.
Ooh.
I won't even have to look at the book because I know the show so well. When the characters come up, you know the meaning of the character and what's behind it.
Yeah, that's a really good way. If anyone is like wanting to learn tarot, that's a really good way to learn. If you can find a deck, like actually one of the ways that I learned to read the tarot when I was a teenager is I got the Alice in Wonderland tarot deck. Yeah. And like that's actually my like all-time favorite book ever. And I read it like a million billion times. And so if you get a deck that, even if it's like, if you're like, oh, it's a pop culture deck or whatever, if you get a deck that has some familiarity to you and you understand the symbolism based on something that you already understand, you begin to understand the symbolism of the tarot. And then if you want to, you can eventually then just transpose that into, if you want to do something more traditional, like a Rider-Waite or another. There's some really amazing decks out there. Actually, I was recently visiting, I was able to go back and visit my family, and I was visiting my, like my nieces and nephews and stuff. And they had some really cool decks, including like, there's this really cool deck that is just much more like, it's just like a much more inclusive version of the Rider-Waite. It has it's much more representative. Some of the symbolism in there just shows like, I don't know. It was just like a way more advanced version of the Rider-Waite. And I was like, oh, this is just a beautiful, beautiful deck. Just some of what it depicted. But so just back to the Thoth deck, I was like, my mom hands me this deck and I'm like, what is this? This feels amazing. And I reach in and I pull this card out, and I don't even remember what the card was, but I was just like, this deck just feels like, it just felt so good. It was like, this is just an awesome deck. So I'm really surprised because I have literally played with this, not this exact deck, but a variation of this deck. You know, I've opened and played with this deck many, many times before and just haven't really cared about it. And here I am, I'm just like in love with it. And it turns out that my mom had this friend, and I don't know, he just was this really unique guy. I mean, he was a friend of my family's, my mom, my brother, and my parents in particular. And he was a really unique guy, and he happened to have a lot of treasures that he liked to bury them. It was just something that he did. He buried treasures.
Okay.
And he had taken this deck, and I never really got the full story as to why he buried this deck. I can tell you I do not think he buried this deck because he was like, I'm going to bury this deck to like cleanse it. Like that is not he was like this guy who was basically like living on a mining claim in like the 2000s. Like he was not like doing this for like spiritual purposes. I don't think. Right.
Okay.
What he was doing was he had some things that were now I don't think that that's why he was doing it. I think he was doing it because he had things that meant something to him for various reasons in his life. and he buried them so people wouldn't take them from him. I don't know entirely, though, and I never really got the full story as to why he had done this, but for whatever reason he did it, it was a really, really smart thing to do because he had this deck buried in the ground with some other items apparently for over 10 years.
Right.
And it was like, because it's a used deck. So, I was like, ooh, used tarot. You're never supposed to do used tarot deck. That I also don't believe. It depends on, it's like I've like used books. I like people. I like their old energy. I don't have a problem with that. It's like if it feels weird and EBGB to you, then, maybe then you can leave it at, Zach Baggins' Haunted Museum in Vegas or whatever. But like, I kind of like people's weird old stuff. Like I'm a collector. So then my mom's telling me this story and I'm just like, oh, this deck is so amazing. And she's like, well, you can have it. And I just said, oh, I was hoping you would say that. She said, I know. I figured I could tell you wanted it. And that's kind of why she had pulled it out. Anyway, so that's the deck. And that deck has been the most prophetic deck of, and then on top of that, I have a Dion Fortune Tarot deck, which is a very strange deck. It's actually kind of rare, and it's an odd deck. It's a very, if you ever see it, or if anyone ever has used one out there, it's extremely prophetic, but it's kind of an odd one. It has words on it, and they don't always correspond with traditional tarot interpretations, and it's just a strange deck. Like it's not bad strange.
And what's the name of it again?
It's just called the Dion Fortune Tarot. It's kind of hard to find, and I haven't fully wrapped my mind around it, let's just say. It's based on her teachings, and I have not fully wrapped my mind around, nor do I fully agree.
I'm still here.
You're in the dark.
I'm still here. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Mm-hmm.
Okay, good. The reason why I could barely hear you, I apologize. My headphones went out on me, and I don't know where my camera went. Hang on. No, it's not going to let me go on camera here. Oh, can you hang on for 1 sec, guys? I apologize. It's live radio. Hang on. Let me see what I can do here. I might have to pop out, pop right back in. Give me a sec.
Okay.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Oh, perfect. Now I can hear you. That's why I was sitting so close. I was trying to hear you. It's with the iPhone that with StreamYard, for some reason, I never had to wear headphones before, but since we updated to the latest firmware, if you don't have headphones on, it is literally like half a decibel. Sorry, so I cut you off in your story because I could hear what you're talking about.
I can hear you great.
Okay, good. Yeah. I can hear you perfect now. No problem. So you were saying now this deck, like it was the most prophetic deck.
Yeah, it's a strange deck. This is what the back looks like. The card I got was horrible, though, so I'm not going to show it to you. But it's a strange deck. So the back looks like that.
Okay. Do you want to see? You said some of the words don't correspond to the card.
It's just, I don't know. Okay, it's kind of like negative's not the word I would use necessarily for the way that it's just it's the imagery. It's a little different. I think I'm not quite sure quite how to describe it. It's based on a lot of her teachings, which I'm not fully familiar with. And what I am familiar with, I don't necessarily totally agree with or get exactly. So honestly, but it's interesting because I have like so I have like actually 4 decks in a row, and I have like Fortune, Crowley, Rider-Waite, and then I have this like herbal deck that's kind of based on the Rider-Waite, but it's herbs, and so that's like another one, like you were saying. I know because I have a decent herbal
I know you
knowledge,
do. Yeah.
I
Yeah.
can like, well, I don't know what that card means, but I know what that herb does. So it helps
Right.
me kind of figure that out. And so the two things like kind of, you know, they help. So basically like, it's like I do the past, present, future, whatever. And then I do like the palate cleanser. So
Okay,
like the
I got
herbal one
you.
is the one that kind of like,
I
okay,
got
that,
what you're saying. You take
yeah.
one from each deck, kind of thing, whatever way you kind of feel, and that's the beauty, because I've done a video on YouTube about how to do a one card reading. But the thing
yeah. Cool. Yes.
What I keep saying to people is, you got to do what you feel drawn to. So if you've got a question, can I do this? I would say yes, because there's rules, and then I think with the way people's intuition works, that you have to go with what works for you. Like I got this little deck that I love, the Nightmare Before Christmas.
Oh, me too. Me too.
I don't need cards, but where I like cards are when, and I haven't done it in so long, I haven't had time, but every now and then I go live and I'll just do free one question readings for people.
Oh, I love that. I think one card readings are wonderful.
Well, they are,
wonderful.
but what usually happens is somebody will ask a question, I tell them, because I hate when, you know, someone's doing readings, I'm only taking the first 10 people, that's it. Well, I just go whatever lights up for me. Then when it comes through, I'll give people what I get from spirit, and then I'll shuffle the deck. They can see me shuffle it, and I pull the card without fail, just like you knew about the High Priestess. Without fail, the card will say exactly, you know, it'll go fit right in with the reading, or it'll pretty well word it in a couple sentences what came through for some spirit. But that's the beauty in this, because these are tools. That's all they are. My son had told me about this. He loves, my older son, he's part of the LGBTQ community. He does some activism. He is a drag queen, a budding drag queen.
So let me see. So check out the. I believe it's
called. I'm just about to tell you we're on the same page. The drag queen deck. We have it. Yeah. We have it.
I love that. Yes, but also I think I'm pretty sure it's the witches. I think it's the witches tarot is very. That's one of the ones that's very inclusive. It doesn't necessarily show. Like I think it has like not only people of varying like. There's, you know, variance in skin tones, but there's also like variance in like relationships. So like, I think, I don't know if they were showing me the Lovers card, but one of my nieces was showing me like, just that it's a much more like inclusive, just in terms of how people's relationships are depicted in the cards. Like it's not necessarily all, you know, male, female, gendered relationships in the cards themselves.
Well, both my sons are gifted, as are most of our children. When we're intuitive, we know that they are. So he reads with that deck. Now, for me, but I think he reads with it because he knows the queen so well.
Yeah,
so
he understands. It's
the same thing. Like
I know exactly what that one means. Yeah.
Yes, he knows exactly what it means. But you know what I wanted to ask you, I think is important. Hi, Dave. We didn't get, you know what, Varla and I get Dave. Talking.
Hi, Dave.
I wanted to ask you this because I think this is important since we're on that topic. What's the history behind decks? Because I still meet people to this day who believe that they are demonic and they are evil. When I try and explain it's just a tool, just like a Ouija board is just a tool. It's all it is.
Yeah, so I was just having that same thought because people ask me that question all the time about Ouija boards, especially because like in the more recent book, I have a whole section about spiritualism, and in particular like how spiritualism, like women use channeling and the spiritualist tools as a means, especially during Victorian times, to actually have like well beyond, you know, earlier than Victorian times and well beyond, it's been a means for women in particular to have like a trade in society that isn't basically like, you know, I mean, the other things available, which is like, you know, servitude, being a maid, prostitution, like, you know, there aren't that many, you know, traditionally weren't that many channels for women. And so women could become authors, and they could become, you know, the Fox sisters made quite a bit of money before they were, you know, outed by one of their own.
In Victorian times though, right? Like the seances and all that stuff.
Very much. Yes. And it was part of high society. I mean, in the U.S., it was happening in the White House. So what the president's wife was doing is totally like in vogue. Then everybody wants to do,
Yeah.
But the history of the car, I mean, that goes back. Like, I mean, I don't know all of the history, but one of the women that I have learned, like especially from reading and just kind of, I took a couple of workshops with, is this woman named Mary Greer, and she's like she's from the same town that I grew up in California. So I took some classes from her there, and then have read a bunch of her books on Tarot, and she's really, really interesting woman. She's a bit older than me, so she's been studying Tarot for a long time. Actually, she wrote this amazing book even prior to all of that called Women of the Golden Dawn, which is all about the women who like were, doing some of that like ritual magic during the time, like Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, and like I once asked her about that and if she would ever write a book like that again, and she just told me it was so much work, and it was just like really, really exhaustive research, because there was nothing like that out there before she wrote that. And her passion is Tarot. And I once went to her house, and she literally has like, how like in my house I have like wall-to-wall books. She has wall-to-wall decks. Actually, she's an incredible person. If you ever were looking for someone that like you wanted to talk to, somebody who was like the most interesting Tarot card history person ever, she's incredible. So anyway, she's just a really interesting, really kind person also. So she also introduced me to this thing called I think it's like I have incense going, so if I'm going like this, it's not a ghoul. It's because I had.
I have a ghoul. I have about 80 decks myself. I have about 80 decks myself. Now that's not wall to wall, but I have
you have
so
more
many
than I do,
not
for
all
sure.
Tarot, a lot of oracle decks.
Yes, exactly. And like she is the first person who I had ever heard of the Lenormand kind of cartomancy. So I learned a lot about, just from reading her books and from taking a couple classes, some of the history of just card reading from her. But I mean, it really goes back. So even just the word tarot, I think, is like a Italian word in origin.
Yeah, I was wondering if it was French, and I can't think of anything in
French. Tarot. I mean, I think it comes from tarot, which is an Italian word, but I don't really know. It could probably.
I'll have to ask my adopted daughter. I call her my adopted daughter. I haven't talked to her in a while.
It depends on if you're Italian or French. Is probably like all my Italian friends say 7
languages.
Okay, yeah. So it depends on like if you're an Italian witch or a French witch, probably. But I think they are both. Like, I do think, because I have seen tarot decks or replicas of tarot decks from the 1400s, 1500s that are like playing cards, but also were used for, because if you know how to read a deck of cards, you can read a deck of cards, right?
Just regular cards,
the Ace of Hearts is the Ace of Cups, right? The Ace of Diamonds is the Ace of Pentacles. Like, you can read a deck of cards. And so it was a secret way to actually be able to continue the psychic arts while, and that all goes back to that time when, the Medicis were practicing alchemy and magic back during the Renaissance, and the Church of England was trying to burn out all the witches. And so they all just went down into Italy and hid in the castles and did magic down there. So, there's like, there's a long, long history of that, not to mention the history of, fortune telling and magic and with the Romani, who were all over, not just in the Eastern European, but they were all over Europe. So yeah. So, I think it goes back pretty far. And I think that, it's little pieces of paper, and it was a card game that was a way to tell fortunes. But, we're just playing cards. We're not actually, because fortune telling was, for a while outlawed, right? So, no, this is just a simple a simple gentleman's game of cards, but actually, you know, you were telling cards. You were telling a woman if, you know, her prince was going to come or whatever kind of things were happening. You know,
how many children or
yep,
how
many children she was going to have, and all that kind of stuff. The things that people would ask you, you know, in the tent.
But that's okay. So I've heard many schools of thoughts with witches. Now we've got. I don't consider myself a witch, but I do know, and I have this.
Most true witches probably don't.
Okay, because
certainly back in the day, right?
I'm going to tell a story on here. I don't think I've ever told on my podcast before. What happened quite years ago, probably about 6-7 years ago. I was mentoring, teaching, as you were talking. I love to do teaching, especially when it comes to what I'm passionate about. And I was mentoring this younger gentleman, and he said when he first met me, the first conversation we had, he said, "I know you." And I said, "Well, of course you know me. We're talking." No, I know you. And he told me he knew me back, I believe. No, this is the strangest story, but I've had it kind of validated. But I want to hear your thoughts on it. So he said, "No, I knew you. It was about in the 1500s." He said, "Your name was Maeve." And right away I knew it was Maven. My name was Maven. I have never heard that name before. I'm getting goosebumps telling you this.
Oh my God, I totally just got goosebumps.
I know. And then I can draw, okay. And I don't draw very often. Like I've drawn a lot of my tattoos and stuff, right? I got the urge to draw. And it's 3:30 in the morning. I've got my sketchbook and I'm drawing this, it's like a Pegasus, a curve. I'm still getting goosebumps. Wow. It shows up in front of me, this winged, beautiful animal. It looked like a unicorn, but it wasn't my pet. It was my, maybe a familiar. I don't know. I knew her name.
Yeah,
I used to call her Chloe, the whole bit. Like this all happened in this time period. He claims, now you always hear that angels were never human. He says he was an angel. He gave me his name. And he said we knew each other back then. He says apparently Lady Titania from the Cusp, I was her sister, the dark sister. Okay. And he said you used to have this long black shimmering hair down to about here. And he said you had the most silver eyes and you used to wear this crown of almost like black thorns and twigs. Okay. And he said you weren't evil. He said, but you didn't take any crap from anybody, and basically hell unleashed on people that did me wrong. Okay. So there's two reasons why I believe this story. One is I was taking my crystal Reiki course, and for my attunement, I was supposed to meet my Reiki master in meditation. I fell asleep. I couldn't believe I fell asleep. So I messaged her and I go, "Oh my God, I'm so sorry, I fell asleep." Like a half hour right after she sent, she goes, "Oh, don't worry, there's no space and time. I'll send you the recording." 5 days later, I listened to it. This is crazy. 5 days later, I'm in the room in my old house. I'm like, what am I going to sit on? I guess I should get into a meditation pose and some crystals, whatever. I grabbed this fluffy white unicorn blanket I bought. I had my hair all tied back like this. Okay, I don't normally wear it back like this. And I'm sitting here and I'm listening to this meditation, and she's attuning me to each symbol. She first says, and I see you sitting here, she goes, "You got your hair kind of all tied back in a bun like this," like she describes it. My hair was tied back that way. She says, "You're sitting on something really white and fluffy. I'm not really sure what it is." Okay, that killed me. Then she goes through all the symbols. One of her symbols is the 7-pointed star. And she says, "I don't know what it is about your higher self." And remember, this is 5 days before recorded. She goes, "Your higher self took that star and slapped it right where your third eye would be." She goes, "No, I got this vision of you. Long black hair, like almost like black shining silk, silver eyes. And you've got this really strange crown on, like thorns all twisted." And I'm just about falling off my chair. Okay. Because she didn't know all this. And at the end of it, she goes, "I have no idea why I'm sending you this." She goes, "But yeah, I saw this picture of this little, or not picture. She goes, "I saw this figurine in my office. I forgot I had it." And she goes, "It was a fairy. I was told I had to send it to you." She sends it to me, okay, because this has to do with the fairy realm, right? Lady Titania and apparently the evil sister, right? So she didn't know this gentleman I was mentoring, so they didn't have this conversation. Then I had him on my podcast the first week I was there, and I had somebody else on there that had a near-death experience. They were finishing each other's sentences about what it looked like in heaven, where things were indicated, what they had seen, what they had experienced. Okay, this all happened around that time. Now, how does that happen? How does that happen? And the guy that was telling what had happened in heaven, this is the guy that told me that he knew me back in the 15th century. This is the guy that said he was an angel in their lifetime before. How does that happen? They didn't know each other.
That's crazy.
Mm-hmm.
That's
mm-hmm.
crazy. Yeah, and you're not a witch.
I don't
Definitely
know.
not.
But the other thing I will tell you, I get there's some jobs that are very interesting. I'm not arrogant. I don't think I'm a doctor. I'm a nurse. But when my family is ill, even when I worked out in the community, you're on your own. You just call a doctor and you say, what do you want me to order? Okay, yeah, okay, fine, yeah. Check it off. I could look at a wound and I know what it needs.
Wow.
I know what it needs. And like really lot more natural type of stuff. I think I was a witch. Maybe I still am. I don't know. I don't practice the witch art, but so let's talk about that.
Let's talk about that. Yeah, because I think that I think there's a lot of different definitions of being a witch, and I'm
so glad. That's what I meant. Let's talk about that.
Yeah, let's talk about that because, and I mean that, and I mean no disrespect to people who identify as a witch. Okay, because so I do think that there are initiatory witches. And I think that those are probably like the people who really go out in the community and really by all rights and means are the witches. Those are the people who go through the hard work to really call themselves witches publicly because they are going through steps. They are, really doing the hard magical work and doing the internal work that takes to tear down their own barriers constantly to keep themselves ready to constantly do the magical work. That's kind of at the core of initiatory magic. And I think initiatory magic kind of gets like snuffed aside by a lot of the sort of cottage witches because, and I'll explain like what those are, at least in my mind, because I think that it's sort of viewed as like it's a little too religious or a little too tight. But in what I've seen, and I am not an initiatory witch, I've never gone through those stages, but I know witches who are, and what I've seen is that it does take a lot of self work and a lot of discipline, and I think it deserves a lot of respect and a lot of recognition. So I think there are people who kind of can like really say, I am a witch, and like I'm a witch. I did the work. I'm like, I wear the hat, I wear the crown. Like I'm a witch in the way that you could say, I am a writer. I am I am an actor. Like this is my role, right? Like there's that level of being a witch.
You eat, breathe, and sleep it. It is you. It's your essence.
Yes. And I do. So then there are people who are, I think like there are people who identify as witches in kind of more of like a cottage witch sort of way, and that those are people.
Witch, I've heard kitchen.
Yeah, like kitchen witch, like maybe a little just more into might not even call themselves witches, but like are more interested in herbalism, into the healing arts, like witchy things. Maybe don't identify themselves constantly as witches, but tend to gravitate toward things that involve witchcraft. I might put myself a little bit more in that category. I personally, my mother is a witch, and so a lot of the things that I know about witchcraft, I learned from her at a young age, and so I wouldn't put myself in an initiatory witch category, but I have learned certain secrets about witchcraft that I probably shouldn't have learned at a young age. So
but you're like a sponge at that age too, so
yep,
you've absorbed it.
sure. So I maybe was exposed to some things that other people would have like learned a little later on. But you know, I'm a little bit more eclectic. I don't know. I'm kind of just a weirdo that likes a lot of things, and you know,
I don't think you're a weirdo.
Well, like a good weirdo. Like a good weirdo. So, you know, if I need to do certain things, you know, I know how to do them. And if, you know, I mean, you know, if I need to take care of some stuff, I can take care of some stuff. So I consider myself a witch in that way. And I certainly have done, I would say, some of the internal some of the internal work. I don't like to open myself up to other people. I don't like to open that part of myself up to other people at all. It's just I really don't. I don't like to open my spiritual self up to other. I don't mind talking about spiritualism and religion, and I actually love talking about those things and love hearing other people's points of view. But when it comes to me actually doing like ritual work or anything like that, there are very few people that I feel comfortable really revealing how I might go about doing that with. So I guess in that way, I'm quite solitary. But I also think there are people that are witches in a more like universal and global sense, and that the term being a witch doesn't necessarily need to mean that you are like, it's almost like being like just being a healer, or how can I put this? It doesn't mean you're
like a Wiccan is all kind of love and light, nature and healing. Then I've had other people that are friends of mine that are witches, and I've had one in particular say to me, I've had a few witches say this, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this statement, that to be a true witch, you have to know how to hack. That's what they told me.
I would say that anybody that tells you how you have to be a witch isn't a true witch. That's my thought. I would say that anybody that tells you how you have to be a witch, they can say how they have to be a true witch.
I agree.
They can have their own standards, and they can maybe have standards for their own coven and their own circle, and they can hold those standards internally toward the people that
but
they,
that's
you know,
them. That's like everything in life, though, right? That would be like you saying to me, this is the kind of writer you need to be. And if you can't do this, you're not a writer.
But it's the type of, or you're not a Catholic unless you do this, or you're not a, you know, it's like, no, you don't get to tell me, no, you don't get to conduct my soul, you know, and you don't get to conduct my creative being. And, you know, I'm just, right. And I'm like totally that kind of person. Like as soon as you say something like that, I'm like, yeah. Yes.
I think that can go for anything.
Thank you for your input on my inner soul and well-being. There's the door. But yeah, so I really important. I do. And I also think that, like, you know, everybody kind of has to, like, yes, people have to find their own path. And I have my own very, very strong beliefs. And if somebody were to ask me, like, really specifically, like, well, how would you do this? And I certainly have a few younger people, like a couple of, you know, there's one of my friend's daughters in particular asked me specific questions. And I have said to her mom, I mean, do you mind if I just like show her some stuff? Or, you know, or I've given her a few items, like, okay, here are some things, figure out what you know, here in a little tiny cauldron and some candles, like figure out what you want to do with it or whatever.
Yeah.
But like you can, and also, you know, you can read, that's what books are wonderful for that, because with books you can take what you need from that. But, you know, I don't know, it's like anything, you know, you can call yourself a, whatever, you can call yourself anything. But I guess just getting back to the idea of like being a witch, like in a more global sense, like using the term, and I don't mean this in a religious sense or like even, it's almost like I don't know what would the equivalent be. There's a universalness of being a witch in it's like you can't help it.
Yeah.
Right? Like if you're a witch, you're a witch. And it doesn't really matter what anyone says or what anybody does, or even what you say or do. If you're a witch, that's a power that you have. And there are interchangeable terms, with people will go and split hairs and they'll do a lot of scholarly work to, point it out. But there's a priestess. Priestess is a word that was, just created to put on the other side of priest. There's goddess and God. There's all of these words that were kind of created to try and connect humans to this kind of divine thing. And witch is a very like earthy word and a very real word. And
it has a lot of negative connotations too. I think that's I'm going to read Dave's comment because I think it adds to a conversation. But I think it really depends on what you want to call yourself. You can also say, these are my friends, but it doesn't have to define you, or my interests, but it doesn't have to define you.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good point. So personally, well, I've been called much worse than a witch. Yeah, so I know I laugh. You say witch like it's a bad thing. I definitely do not. I have always been flattered by the word, but certainly some people are not, and it has negative connotations because negative things have been, it's people were murdered for it, right? Like we were persecuted for being called this. It was a bad thing to be called a witch. I mean, you were chased down, your children were chased down, your property was stolen, your animals were taken. Like it was not a good thing. And, you often were not doing anything wrong, right? So like 89%, 99% of the time, you weren't doing anything wrong.
No, but 1%, a lot of people put, like Dave said, you're right, Lorilei, because of the connotation, a lot of people, like I'm not offended by the term witch. And the more you're saying, I'm going, I am kind of drawn over. You can take your mental notes here. But there is a lot of negative connotation with the word witch. And, even on TV shows, for goodness sake, you see a witch is always evil or deceptive. Or
in my house, like my son, every single time, I'm like, they look at me. I'm just like, they can tell I'm annoyed. I'm like, another negative representation of a witch. They always know when I'm like irritated. Right? Because I'm like, that once again, witches are misrepresented. Just like
stepmothers, for goodness sake. Like I like using. I don't even know if I like the term bonus mom, but it's not easy to be a step-parent. But
evil. I know.
Stepmother.
It's always evil witch. I know. No, absolutely. But there's a long history of the negative connotation, and that it's it's someone who is ugly, it's someone who is bad, it's someone who is going to put a curse on you, it's someone who's out to get you, it's someone who doesn't like children, it's someone who is like just rotten and gross,
will harm you, like
and
stab you in the back, and
yes, and that's because it often was little old ladies who were persecuted for witchcraft, because what would happen is they were like these little old ladies, they were often widows. And they had, I mean, we're not talking about like the Salem witch trials, but they were widows and they had land and people wanted their land. And so they were just disposable. They were disposable old women, and they were just accused of witchcraft, or they had some power because they did know the folk remedies. They did know what wayside herbs would cure you and what you could use to keep from having a child, because your husband wouldn't stay away from you and you'd had like 7 children in the last 8 years, right?
Yeah.
And so that gave women power, and anything that gave women power, especially during the, 1500s, was really, really dangerous. And so for women. And so these women, the easiest thing to do was to just call them a witch, take their land by rights and give it to whoever had, accused them of witchcraft. And so that very negative connotation of the haggy little old woman who was negative and out to get you carried through. And it's really sad, actually, because it's this ongoing idea that women as they age are disposable.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, really, right?
That's true. That's true.
It's, you know, I mean, the Salem witch trials is a whole other kind of crazy Puritan insanity thing going on there. But that really is, there's that continuation of the idea. And then the flip of that is that if they were young and beautiful, they were just like there to, you know, seduce you and drown you like mermaids,
well, to
right?
tell you the truth, my name, I remember Del
Oh,
has a
yeah,
weird
I
name,
know.
and I have a weird name. For those of you who don't know, it actually comes from the Lorilei
Yeah.
on the River Rhine, I
Sign.
think, in
Yes.
Germany.
It runs through Paris,
you
too.
know,
Yeah.
and they were sirens, and with their
Yes.
song, they would lure sailors to crash into the rocks and die,
Oh,
basically.
yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Mhm.
People, they would lure people into the river and then they would drown. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I never found out what the
Evil.
purpose of that was. Why they needed to be drowned or killed, but it is a pretty morbid type of name, and it's
I
spelled
also
that
think it
almost the
was
same.
it was a name for the current. I mean, it was a way to keep, it was the current, right? It was the lore for the current, right? Like that. I think that with the mermaids too, it's like the folklore also was describing something that was the fingers of the current and the rushing thing. So how confusing it is to like be sucked in and
So if you think about this though, with magic, right? Like really with magic, like you think the word spelling, spells, words, right? Part of this, now you can correct me if I'm wrong, right? The mind is a powerful, powerful, powerful thing. People just don't realize how much power we have with our minds and our energy. So I would imagine you're all, say, with a coven, all focusing, say you're going to manifest something, right? You're adding extra energy with words by speaking, the same things, you're focusing on the same things. Yeah. We're in a planet of manifestation here, right? Yeah. So is that what we're really doing with magic, or what are we doing? What's your thoughts?
Totally intention. I mean, they've actually proven that scientifically, right? Remember that, oh gosh, what was his name? There was that study, it was like maybe 15, 20 years ago, where the guy put like
the water?
I can't remember. Yeah, he put the dish of water in the room and he had everybody think like horrible thoughts, and the water had weird changes, and then he had everybody think positive thoughts, and the molecules changed. And it proved the power of intention that everybody's been saying for, thousands of years.
They've done it with plants. They've done it with water.
Yes. So absolutely. So you have that power of intention, and then you have, people all very like-minded, and not only like-minded, but the idea of ritual. I mean, you see that in indigenous cultures around the world, how the importance of ritual, right? And that is absolutely, and witchcraft comes from indigenous cultures. Celtic cultures in particular had a lot of ritual, and some of what we think of as traditional witchcraft came from some of those, like what we think of in the US today as some of those rituals are taken from some of the, British witches and such were taken from some early Celtic rituals, around, for example, the Easter rituals, the Oster, the spring rituals.
You always read my mind when we're on this show, because I was just
spring equinox, right?
Into that.
Yeah. The just like these kind of the rituals. So in addition to the intention of everybody focusing, there's also that transition and the power of the ritual. So if you and I just walked into a room and we're like, okay, let's just focus our minds, like, sure, we might be able to sort of achieve. But if you and I, 10 of our friends walked into a room, I might be into that, actually. I could be convinced to do that kind of. I like those kind of rituals that are like orchestrated by someone else, like those kind of things. I do enjoy that, the occasional kind of group ritual, but especially on holidays. But
well, then you're in a place where nobody knows you, right? Like if you want to know them,
if it's with people. I don't mind if it's with people I know. I don't like to conduct them. It's like too much pressure. But I do like to do them occasionally. But I guess my point is, So imagine you go into this situation and, you know, you can like chit chat a little bit and everybody kind of relaxes, but then there's, you know, there's like cued sounds that relax everyone. There's specific, everyone's in specific garb. So the mood is right. The lighting is right. There's certain like smells. There's a fire. There's like all of these things that like minute by minute are kind of putting you in this transition so that you're actually transitioning from the reality heavy, you know, four walls or wherever you are, you're transitioning from this like real world space into some other kind of otherworldly space. And you have those ritual elements like fire, smoke, something that is going to actually show you the invisible, right? That's the presence of smoke will show you the invisible. So now you're starting to see the invisible world is visible. Perhaps there will be some kind of shared or individual libation. Doesn't mean that you're necessarily taking alcohol or something like that, but just that you're then having some kind of like ritualistic drink. And so then there's like that another element, or there's some kind of like thing where you're now all agreeing, we are now sharing and agreeing in this pact that we are going into this space, we're all going to be respectful. We're in it. And then you all will start focusing your intention. So not only are you like, it's like going into a haunted house and like getting into the middle of it and then starting, you know, so you're like all the way in it and you're taking, and, you know, you just kind of like, you've taken all of the steps to get to this like space, and then you focus your intention. So you imagine like all of that happening specifically, and then it's not just you, right? But it's like all these groups at the same night, all, you know, all the bonfires burning all around on the equinox, all around the hillsides, all around, you know, the countryside, all around the country on that time. Then of course that's going to have, you know, some kind of effect. Yeah.
I wanted to say hi to, we've got Carrie, sorry, I haven't got my glasses on, Langdock. She said Lynn McTaggart has a book on intention.
Yes.
She said, Dr. Emoto, thank you.
Emoto, yes,
Dr.
thank
Emoto
you.
with the water experiment.
Yes, exactly. Yes, Lynn McTaggart, that's exactly what I was thinking of. And it was about what, like 15 years, maybe a little longer, 20 years ago. I know, that was a beautiful book. Yes, I remember that. That was great.
So now with spring, like, because, you know, especially back in the older, you know, centuries ago, you know, this was a time of rebirth. And I know we've talked a little bit, let's talk, it's Ostara, is that the what it's called?
Mean, honestly, I just always say Ostra, but I don't have no idea if that's actually how you say it.
I don't either. Someone. I always get it wrong, but it's spring. We'll say spring then. Yeah. Right?
Yeah. Well, I always thought it was like Ostra or Ostra because it kind of, it's like Oestre, and then that kind of ends up becoming,
I've heard different
sounds like Easter,
so
you know?
It's like
the word starts sounding like Easter, and then you figure out where they got Easter from.
Ostra, that would make sense to me. Yeah.
Yeah.
So now, where would that all? So how did we get? We know the Christian meaning behind Easter, but there's more than just the Christian. There's a pagan, you know, pagan background. Paganism came long before Christianity. So where did it develop? What happened with that?
I think like the, you know, kind of like the early Celtic, it's based on what was happening in nature all around, right? And as I mean, I'll just kind of speak to like the Celtics. I don't really
know because that's your background where you know most
like,
of
it's a lot of like what I know, just you know, in terms of also like my family background and what I grew up, you know, learning about as well. But and I also will say like this. It takes place around this time also because, like, you know, in Ireland in particular, like this would be the time of year when, you know, this is when things are starting to spring back to life after winter, right? And so when you're looking around you, right, and I know where you are, Laura. I don't know how if your snow is finally melting. Normally,
it's going so quickly. Oh my God! Yes,
This
like
is the
so
year.
hot up here too.
It's such a relief. So where I am, not every year has been like that, but this year it's happening, right? It's like, this is actually a good year for that melt. And, I think it's just an observation, of what's happening around. You've got the little bunnies are leaping around, and it's a time to pay homage to the goddess of spring, and to just kind of like bring back celebrate. So when I lived in California, I have to say, I did not, and especially living in the San Francisco Bay Area, where it's kind of just like spring all year round, honestly. Like, it never really gets to be summer. It never really gets to be fall. It's just kind of spring all year round. So I didn't always have like the full appreciation. And this year in particular, this was one of those years where you really felt like that pure excitement of the promise of summer. And you knew you were probably going to get like one more snowstorm or something in between. Like,
it's still going to come, I'm sure.
But you just knew summer was going to come, and you just knew you could like see your garden growing. You could almost feel what summer was going to feel like in the air. And so I really was like, I need to make an offering. Like, this is the year that I need to just make a big old offering under my apple tree and just say, thank you. I'm so happy. Thank you. Thank you for actually melting and bringing, the seasons back. Cause this was one where I was like debating how.
Well, we're so close. Dell and I were talking about that the other night. Once our border opens, we're meeting that you're coming to the cottage for sure.
I know. I was seriously like, I might have to stow away on a pirate ship in the South. Like, I didn't know if I was going to make it this year. This was really intense. I was like, I might have to just get out of here. This is it.
Yeah. We got a lot of snow in the north, didn't we?
Yeah. Yeah. It was intense for sure. But I think so. Yeah. I mean, it was a celebration. And then, of course, the eggs are all another kind of like fairly obvious one, right? Because you just like, there's laying eggs time, and eggs are hatching, and we're going into this wonderful spring season. We're celebrating like the beginning of things. And so I think it kind of makes sense to have anything that is sort of like overlapping the sort of renewal and resurrection of things in any kind of holiday, they're all kind of overlapping this time of year. So whatever religion it is, whatever in the Northern Hemisphere, right? Because I have to say, like, I always get caught thinking it's not spring everywhere. Like, it's, only in the Northern Hemisphere. Got to remember that. But yes, it's totally
I have friends in Australia, as I'm sure you do.
Yeah.
And they're going to be having fall.
Yeah, they're like, it's not spring here. But of course, they have a spring equinox, just when we're having fall. And nonetheless, I mean, that's, there's not like a huge, it's not a huge leap to think like, oh yes, of course, this would be a time when you would have like the renewal. Ishtar, when you have the idea of kind of, it's also like the Persephone, the Ishtar. Okay, so Ishtar is the one who like goes down into the lower levels and comes back up, as did the Persephone, who kind of has the deal with Hades and the her mom Demeter, right? Who's like the goddess of this.
Yeah.
Well, Hades is the one who took her to the underworld, right?
Yeah.
Took her. That's a kind of a weird, that's a weird story there. Yeah. Yeah. Like in the watered down version, she was like, oh, I don't mind being your wife. Right? In the
No, not at all.
No, not at all. You're cute.
That's a Disney version.
Yeah. In the Disney version, he's actually like weirdly attractive, and she doesn't mind being with him. Yeah. In the real one, she had no choice. In the real one, they actually plot to steal her, and she's still kind of a child. It's very weird, very creepy.
Geez.
Yeah, it's very creepy. But anyway, her mom gets her out. But before that happens, he sneaks a pomegranate seed in her mouth, and she's got to go back there in the winter. But she gets to come up, and it's the time that she gets to come up. So yay, she's with her mom again. So that's when she pops back up And yeah, and actually that whole thing is that's why there's winter, because Demeter gets really mad, and she basically is like, she rips down all of the flowers and basically curses all the land. She's like, nope, you're never going to have wheat, you're never going to have any fruit, nothing. And they basically make the gods are like, uh-oh, well, we'll make an agreement, we'll send her back. And then Hades is like, I'm going to sneak this pomegranate seed in her mouth before she goes back. And then that's the bargain, is that she's down there half the year. So
that makes a lot of sense, though, when people didn't have the science and all that we had to make. What an interest. Yeah, I would have rather learned about stuff like this in school than all the science. I mean, I know science is important, but like, what a cool, it's an interesting story about what, I'm sure everybody sitting around the fire and the elders would be telling the stories and explaining how the seasons are changing, regardless of what culture you're in, right? Just the names would change and what have you, but you'd have to have a story to explain this, right?
That would be like a really, really fun experiment to like say, if you really didn't know, like if you like put someone in a situation, we're not talking about like, a survivor or anything, but like just put someone in a situation, like whatever the situation is, and say like, okay, you need to come up with a story as to why this happened. There's there's no technology. This is not science fiction. Like, you need to tell me why this happens every year. Like, you got to explain it. Why does this white stuff fall from the sky every year? And you have to come up with some kind of myth or whatever and explain it, because there's no other way to explain it. There's no such thing as weather vanes or we don't understand about clouds and snow and sky. We don't know what that is. There's just cold thing that comes from the sky. You got to explain what snow is, or you have to explain what a lake is to someone. I think that would be a really interesting experiment, to try and get somebody to actually wipe their mind enough to like come up with a way to tell that story, because that's, I mean, that is, people were trying to explain the world to each other.
I was thinking about this because my birthday is August 15th. So usually after my birthday, I forgot to mention I live in Canada, you're in the US, but we're just a border apart, basically.
I know, so close.
Not very far from each other. Well, a little bit. It's a few hours, but compared to most people I have on my show, you're about the closest I think I've had, from across the border. So you're right. Like so that's what I say. My birthday is the 15th of August. So I'm about 6 hours north of Minneapolis, Minnesota, I tell people. So you figure around my birthday, it starts to get cool. And the birthdays in our house almost are scheduled like Delta's at the end of May. We know by the end of May that usually we're going to be able to drive up to the cottage. My youngest birthday is March 14th. It's always March break during his birthday, and things start to warm up. So, and then you had winter birthdays, so it's almost like you knew. And when you think about it, right, like you might think it was the worst weather, it was colder, it happened later or sooner. You have those benchmarks, and you realize, like when you get to my age, that holy cow, it seems to always happen at the same time every year, and it does.
You could tell, like you could just tell time by somebody's birthday, or you could tell that's how you tell your story. Like, well, it's your birthday because the ice is melting on the lake. That's how you know it's your birthday. You don't actually have you're not allowed to have a calendar. You just know that the ice is melting on the lake. You can, like that. I mean, it would just be really, it would be an interesting experience. It would be very interesting to try and live a year like that. You'd have to sell the story to someone so that they could pay you to live for a year like that without a calendar.
You wouldn't need money. You need money after, but
you'd need money before and after to live without a calendar.
That's my birthday, Carrie, August 15th. Carrie's been putting, sorry, you know what happens, Carrie? I haven't seen you in the comments before, but Varla and I get talking. We could talk for hours. She said we should learn myths and science both. We're finally getting to that point, like the ancients. I don't know. You know what I just said to my partner, Dell? I should give him a shout out, as it's 11:11 my time, must be 10:11 your time, 10:11 your time. Is knowing what I know now, I would have raised both my boys so completely differently. completely differently. I don't have regrets about it because I realize everything that happened the way it was meant to happen. That's the way I believe it. But especially like with my youngest being in the special ed, community at school, and Dell and I happened to go to the school. You would think the school would be on their best behavior. What we saw for 2 hours, we realized time to yank them out of school. Now, I'm not telling people to do that. That just works for our family. So when you're talking about what you are, Carrie, I think that when we have a little bit more control about what we can educate our kids with, but then everybody's got a different idea about education. So I understand there's going to be standards. So you need the social element too, right? So it's six of one, half of a dozen of another, I guess, right? Happy birthday to Carrie. I have to remember that. You're August 15th.
It's
wow,
the same birthday as you. Oh, that's so cool.
Same birthday as
she was
me.
like, what? Your birthday's the same.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know. I always tell my son, because he's going into middle school, which is a whole other level of, he's had a really wonderful school experience thus far. I mean, of course, there's been some bumps along the way. We had to change schools a couple times just because of moving and stuff, but he's done really well. And of course, pandemic shut down school and all of that fun stuff. But I always tell him, like, middle school will be fine. And if it's not, plan B, homeschool, travel around the world. That's plan B.
Oh, I love it. What an education that would be.
Just so he knows, that there's if it ever even feel like I'm, you got to stick with stuff, whatever. But like, it never needs to get so bad that
or it's not final. There's always
there's always a plan B. Come on, Ireland. Come on, your mom's a writer. I can write from anywhere.
What's so cool? You have
be some perk. It's not the royalty check.
You had such an interesting upbringing, because the people that I meet, that they were exposed to a lot of the stuff that people may consider weird, right? I don't consider it weird. I wasn't raised that way, but I know that my dad's mom had abilities. And I always joke that, well, I don't joke, it's the truth. My mother makes fun of people like myself, like would never in a million years. Like this would just be an absolute embarrassment to her. But it is what it is, right? You are who you are. But I think that when you're raised as a small child, being very open-minded about a lot of the stuff, because like you said, you've talked about this a few times on this show, very unique upbringing. And last few guests I've had recently, it wasn't odd to talk about ghosts. It wasn't odd, like you said, about the tarot or your mom being a witch, or like that was just your norm. And I think it makes you a lot more open-minded type of person. What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, she's probably even more open-minded than I am, because she was raised Catholic. Ooh. And so I know. So she's even more open-minded than I am, because she has, not that I have nothing. I would say she's actually more educated than I am in terms of religion, because I'm not like disparaging of like Catholicism. I just have I have no experience with it. Like,
you're not missing anything. You're not missing anything.
My extent of it's funerals and weddings, honestly.
I went to Catholic school. I was forced to go to church every Sunday. I was forced to, and I always say I don't have a problem. If you know what, I always say it's not my job to judge. So people that need religion, they have it.
Leave that to the Catholics.
For me,
just kidding.
And this is my analogy, and Del and I are on the same page with this. I meant to say that the Del, as we call him sometimes on here, he has to show me the delicious recipe, and my real life partner. But we both, his mother's uber religious. And Nathan is religious. He's been baptized 3 times. He knows the Bible way better than I do. I don't know it that well. But we both, and if I'm going to use religious dogma, I always say, if God is everywhere and God is my father, I don't need to go to a special building to talk to my father. I don't. And if he's everywhere, that's my analogy. And like I say, some people need it, and it's what they have in their life, and it works beautifully. And like we just talked about what it is to be a witch. It's the same thing. If it works for you, great.
Exactly. And so And so my mom, because she was raised Catholic, and her parents were really, really interesting, really good people. I think I've told you before they were both deaf. And so
Oh,
my
you
mom's
did. Yeah, you did.
yeah,
Yeah, I
yeah. So
remember what you did. Yeah.
and so and with my mom or my grandmother in particular, she had a lot of psychic abilities.
Mm-hmm.
So like, and they used to do like parlor games where like they had a lot of friends from the deaf club, and they would
Mm-hmm.
come over and they would sit around the table and they would all like think of something and then have like my uncle like go and get the object from the other room. And of course they weren't saying anything because they wouldn't even sign it to each other. So they would like, do the, and that was like really popular in the 30s. It was kind of like the tail end of all the like spiritualism and stuff.
Telepathy.
So yeah, telepathy. So she had a really interesting upbringing, and she was raised Catholic. I think she went to public school. I don't think she went to Catholic school. So she was raised Catholic. They went to school. They went to church. They went to deaf mass. So actually, I should say I have been to a deaf mass, which was really cool. And then so I would say like she's a little more open minded in that she kind of understands the connections between like a lot of the Catholic rituals and the other kind of because she's done a lot of like the high priestess work with like just this different kind of ritual magic. And so she sees a lot more connections with some of those things than I do, because I don't have that religious
You
background.
don't have both sides, but you're right,
I don't have
because
both
I
sides.
would not consider myself well versed in, witchcraft, but with enough study and reading and learning, I can see many of these things that came it has the label of Catholicism or religious slapped on it. Yet, you can see where the root came from.
Yeah, you can see like totally, you can see parallels. So she's like really, and that, so in that way, she's a really, really good person to talk to, because sometimes she'll like point things out where I maybe have like a blind spot, or I'm just like not thinking of it in a holistic way, which is really good, because I don't always like think of things in that holistic way, because I just like I don't always just like sometimes I'm dismissive. I will say I am guilty of being dismissive of that point of view, because I'm never exposed to it, and that's something like I know I need to work on that and not be so dismissive, because I'm not I'm like, oh, I'm not Catholic, so whatever. But it's like, okay, Catholics and witches can't go on.
I would say that because you weren't raised that way, right? Like you said, it's not something you would go to right away or necessarily see the comparison. I could see that. How do you know if and plus, how could you, I hear what you're saying with being dismissive, but if you don't know anything about it, you don't
But she's like really good about like it's not necessarily her default, but she's really good at seeing like those connections, and so she's very interesting to talk to about that. And I don't remember quite how we got on that, but she anyway, so she has had this really, really interesting background with that. And for me, I was kind of my exposure, the good part of that is that my exposure to Catholicism has been through her, and therefore it has been basically just like the good, like the saints, like the good parts, the cool candles.
That's what I'm saying about being raised the way you were, that none of this was odd or strange.
Well, and it wasn't forced. So it was like, okay, this beautiful church is here, and this church is important. And I went to this, like she was telling me about this church she went to in England, and she said she went to it because she suspected it was on these ley lines. And when she went to it, she and her friend went in there, and they both started bawling, and they didn't know if it was because it was so moving. And then they, just having a lot of conversations about kind of the overlap there without necessarily a lot of the defense, because I don't think her experience with Catholicism was as negative as other people her age. And I think that's probably because her parents didn't quite force it on her to the level that because they were Italian Catholics.
That way. Because what you were saying about them both being hearing impaired, when I was thinking about that, right, when we have one sense go, all the other senses become that much more powerful. Now think about that, like you said, that parlor game they were playing. We are capable of telepathy.
Yeah.
So you figure how powerful that must have been compared, because they have to use, you know what I mean, other senses. I wonder if that's part of why it worked so well for them.
Oh, they were really funny. My grandfather was deaf mute. But my grandmother didn't lose her hearing until she was 10, actually. So she could speak, and she could actually hear a little bit if you turned something up like super loud, and she could read lips.
Right.
But my grandfather lost his hearing when he was just like a little tiny boy. And
I
he
have
was
a
also
cousin that's deaf and has a cochlear implant, but she got it quite late in life. So unless you're around her a lot, sometimes it's a little bit hard to understand. And she's so patient with you too. Absolutely. So I've been around that my whole life too.
Yeah. And I often want, like, okay, so this is my sister and I, we have this conversation all the time. What would life be like for our grandparents if they had cell phones where they could text and like text their grandkids and communicate in that way? Because they had the thing where you put the phone down and then you type, and you couldn't even really, like, if you needed to call someone, you had to make sure they had the other machine on the other end. You couldn't just call somebody. Just so many little things, so many advancements in technology now. FaceTiming with, like, you can actually put, you know, when you have a Google call with someone, you can actually put subtitles on it now. All these things that we would have been able to do with them that, you know, we weren't able then. And just kind of all these sort of the implants. I mean, grandmother was born in like 1913 or something. So you know, it was just like life was very different then. And so we always kind of think about that when we text each other. It's like, look, we could have just like texted grandma. This would have been so interesting if we'd been able
been so cool.
to do that.
But like even with that, being exposed to that with your grandparents, and like, you know, they're just grandma and grandpa. Like you don't think anything else of it, right? Like, you know what I'm saying? Versus other people with able to speak and hear. That's what I'm saying. So when you have that very interesting background when you're raised as a child in it, I think at least my experience has been most people have been more open-minded, and like you were joking that you're weird, you're not weird. It's that you've been exposed to a lot of different things, and look at for your writing career, like all the different books you've written and things like that.
Yeah, I mean that, like, actually, like my grandparents' basement was like a huge. So we would go down there and we would spend like I would say a solid month of our summer would be spent with our grandparents, my sister and I.
Wow.
And that was where, you know, all the cousins and older siblings, they would leave behind, you know, whatever they had been reading the previous summer. And my grandmother was totally like that generation that didn't throw anything away. And that's where you would find the old Fate magazines, or like my sister left behind like a Stephen King, you know, collection of Stephen King stories that I read like way too young, you know, like The Body
like
and stuff
like that. Never let your
like,
kid read them at that age, right?
Oh, so young. I think I was like 11. I mean, I am who I am because of those books in the basement. And it was also stuff like, you know, the Ripley's Believe It or Not. It was totally like that era of just like all those kind of like, you know, strange, weird facts. And so those very first books that I wrote were the Book of the Bizarre and the Beyond Bizarre. And they were just full of like all of these kind of, you know,
what
Ripley's Believe It or Not
stuff that you put in your book for our watchers and listeners. So we're going to make sure you know where to find her story and her books and everything. But
let's
what are
see.
Some of the really weird things?
Some of the weird stuff. Well, some of the weird stuff that I'd always been curious about. One of the things that I put in there actually is a little embarrassing because it turned out to like not be true, which I found out by the second book, but it was too late to do anything about it. Was like there was like the so I was really interested in this idea of like things that people did to prevent themselves from either being buried alive or more than that, things that people did to keep themselves from being like their grave robbed, because that was like being buried alive was a pretty big fear, but it was also really common for people's bodies to be snatched because it was totally the time of medical experimentation. And that was a huge, so I started out like not really realizing how big of a topic this was. I just thought like, oh, it's just like, you know, grave robbing, that's like so creepy and weird. But really what was going on was like, and this was like the era in which Frankenstein was written, and also like kind of where some of the Dracula stuff and some of the vampire legends were born. Because what the medical students were doing is they were paying, you know, people in the alleyways, like the, you know, paupers and stuff, they were paying them some money to go into these cemeteries and go and like snatch bodies, like take some fresh bodies, take fresh corpses, and they would like by under cover of night take them to the medical institutions and the medical schools so that the students could operate on fairly fresh cadavers. But this was all like totally illegal, and the church was like completely against it. But it's also kind of the reason that we have modern medicine today, right? Because there was really
cats. We had cats.
I mean, it was like speculation, right? Like that, like there was a lot of speculation about what was actually going on inside the human body back then. So really didn't know, you know, like the history of medicine way better than I do, but there was like, oh, the humors, and like people were like literally like had no idea what was really happening. They had like good guesses. Like they knew what was happening in the arms and stuff.
Why Michelangelo knew the anatomy so
isn't that insane
well,
too?
And underneath
he is like,
the skin.
Yeah. So I was doing some research on that, and I had read this article about this thing called the Bates and Revival device, and I was really like, "What? This thing is crazy!" And the story was that it was this guy, this really wealthy guy, and there were actually quite a few devices that people came up with, including these cages that they would put over, like there would be like this metal cage that went over. And then there was one guy who did have in a cemetery, he did actually have like a telephone or something hooked up. This is like some very, very wealthy person had like a telephone hooked up or something like that he could ring through in case he woke up in his crypt. He could ring through to the like main office or whatever. But the Bates and Revival device was supposed to be this thing that was invented that went down through the grave, and it was a bell that rang. And
I've heard of that.
It was tied around a finger, and the corpse would think. Well, so by the time the book came out, so then like I would say like the book had been out, I had actually like talked about this Bates and Revival device, and I just thought it was like the coolest thing. And then like 3 years later or something, I read this other article that the whole thing like never even existed, and it was like
I've heard of it so far.
I know, I've heard of it too.
The medical stuff, I have heard of that before.
Oh, really? I would feel like really justified if it actually existed.
Swear to God to you, I didn't know the name of it, but I don't know.
Okay, I'm gonna like read
in my mind.
I'm gonna look in my notes again and see if I can find where I actually read about it, because I was like really disappointed in myself.
No, I'm positive. No, I did not know
it was so long ago. I was really young too.
No, I've heard of that before, but if I'm not mistaken, the reason why I believe it was put there, well, never mind the fear of being buried alive, but wealthy people that were buried with a lot of jewelry and stuff, like that was the other reason why.
Yeah, like if you touch my finger and there's a ring on it, you'd be like, yeah.
Well, you'll hear, right, the bell too if they start digging, and but I've heard of that before. I honestly have.
Okay. I actually have I don't like know exactly which one is where, but I actually saved all my notes. I wrote that book almost 20 years ago, actually. That first one. I just realized I should look and see the date. Yeah, I want to say, is it possible? Almost 20 years ago. The Book of the Bazaar.
Pretty quick.
Maybe I'm wrong. I could be wrong, but I think I'm right. I think it was like 2003. I have to check. I'll check the date. Maybe
So how did you find out? Because there is weird things. Like I have a friend, Augie. He's done 3 videos. I usually share them with all kinds of people. One is strange things actually photographed on the dark side of the moon. And he will tell you where he got it, the longitude, the latitude, where he bought it. It's only about a 20-minute video. The second thing, I just about fell off my chair. Now, the one that got me, and I think it was the Mars video, it's either Mars or the moon. There is an actual human figure, no helmet, nothing, just walking along
Oh
on the moon. I think it's
Yikes.
Mars. And then he sent me a video because you'd love his, I should send it to his website. He has over 5,000 pictures of really weird and strange things that have been found and photographed on Earth. So like he's the one that really got me because I'm into fairies and stuff, right? There's an absolute perfect humanoid skeleton about this tall, and perfectly formed. It's not fake. It was found, and he tells you where everything was found. He's got a lot of stuff with aliens, UFOs, the paranormal.
Every time after our you always send me like it's
I know.
It's like I count on it. Like, okay, I'm gonna have like rad things to look at for the next 2 days.
Well, what about the gnomes and the gnome videos and the elf videos and
the
stuff?
one that the best one you've ever sent me was that one of the, like, I think it's in England too, and it's like a dad
I was
goes
just
into
thinking of that. That's
I love that one.
out.
That's the most real one to me. That one was like the most real one of like a dad. He goes into the backyard and the he like goes in and he's like with his kids and he's just like do.
The kids want to show them something like a new like outdoor playground, or I forget
all
what
of
it
a sudden, and it's like it's just there's just something about it. It just feels like really real.
I think it's real.
Real, yeah.
Because the kid goes, what is that, Dad? And he goes, what is what? And then you look and this. Oh, I get goosebumps thinking about it.
Yeah, it's not like creepy or anything, but it's like it's like kind of like wait, it's just very like I don't know, it just feels really real. Like it goes really quickly and it kind of it really did. Like if they faked it, they did such a good job that I just am gonna believe it. Like I
believe it, but when you look them,
I'm accepting it.
Well, when people are wondering what we're talking about, you can look it up. A lot of them are on YouTube, but look up real fairies. Now, the one I will warn you about, that is not real fairies. It's a guy, he's from England, and he's got a beard and glasses, and he's traipsing through the woods, and he's got all these videos. He looks like he's got a little brown fairy kind of popping up behind him. And you can't tell because it's so far away. You see something moving and whatever. Now, there is a guy, I think from Norway, that takes videos like this on YouTube, and he debunks them, but he's very kind. He's not mean. Yeah. And we end up finding that this guy that claims about all the fairies, he's a graphic designer in his other life. But he was so sweet about it. Like a lot of people love this guy's videos because of all the nature and what have you. So I like somebody that does that tells the truth, but doesn't tear somebody to shreds for it.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I'll have to
know that video is crazy. So what are some of the other strange, and we've never talked about that because I think, people don't realize some people never leave their own city. They never leave their own cities. They have no idea what goes on.
I know people who never leave their hometown. I mean, like actually people, I mean, some of my, I know people.
A lot of people.
I mean, like some of my family, like they haven't traveled a lot. They've traveled a little. I've conned some of them into coming here to visit me here and stuff. And you know what? Actually, that's great. Did I tell you about my brother and the chunk of amazing crystals? I think I did. I told you offline.
I think so, but share that. I think that's interesting.
Okay, so the same mountain where the tarot cards were buried, my brother walked into this mine and came out with these amazing crystals that he found in there. So my brother hasn't traveled a lot from where, we grew up, but he has found some amazing places that I've never even been to right there in that small area. So I guess that's kind of, like perspective too. It's like, he's been to places I didn't even know existed, including like crazy, amazing mines with giant, gorgeous crystals growing in them. So I'm trying to think like, what were some of the other weird things? So, so there was like a lot of I had this whole chapter on strange laws, and I would have to it'd be kind of interesting to go back and revisit a lot of those, but there's like a lot of strange laws that are still on. It was called, the chapter is like strange laws still on the books, and it was like ridiculous things that were put on the law books back in whatever, when the laws were made and the states were formed, that make 0 sense and are completely
Even
ridiculous.
back in the day.
Yeah, like it's illegal to whistle after 11 p.m. in, Natchez, Mississippi or something like that. I don't remember the exact one.
Wait. Okay, so let's hold that thought for a second, though. So think about that, because I know with Dell and his little people that he's really into, that there are certain legend and lore with the First Nations people that when you're, say, out in the woods, especially at night, you don't whistle because you can bring on these beings, these little beings, and I don't know if they steal your children or what they do, but like the elders are very, very, very adamant. They do not whistle. Like you just cannot whistle when you're out in the woods. So maybe there was actually something to some of this.
That would be like an interesting thing. I think there's a lot of stuff in those books that, again, like I was significantly younger and not nearly as experienced of an author or researcher. I mean, I think they're great books and they're really fun, but I think it'd be really interesting to go back and revisit and see, like, even the second one, I think, was like a little bit more just well-rounded than the first one. Like I kind of, and the other thing about the first one is that I had never had a deadline like that before. Like I was like, sure, I can do that. And then I was like, crap, I have this like huge book and I have to turn it in by when? And so there was just a lot of pressure. And so I think I kind of just like cranked it.
You have to start somewhere, right?
That book did really well. I mean, it is actually, I think it's like,
because there's not many books out there like that write the
and
way
it was a totally also the other thing is it was a totally like it was it 2000? I have to look up the date. It was like, I mean, obviously the internet and stuff existed because it wasn't that long ago, but it was just like different. It was like I used I still do because I'm kind of old fashioned, but mostly books. So I spent a lot of time in the library, in my own library, just expanding my own library, totally expensing like tons of rad books. I totally did that a lot.
I have your fairy book, and I love that book because you told so many, the way it was written, it went through a lot of the different lore and legend, and then, but it went back, there was little illustrations. I remember like little bits and pieces of history from Celtic, mostly Celtic, I like about it, but it told stories too in it about
that book. I got more by the time I got to that book, I was like much more comfortable with like actually weaving stories together. And I think I feel like by the time I got to like the Banshee one, the mermaid one, and then actually my favorite are the last two. The fairy book, and then my favorite is the paranormal parlor book. Like that. This is actually my favorite book.
A little bit. Let's talk about it.
This is my favorite book. It's I'm holding it up, but some people are just actually listening. It's the Varla Ventura's Paranormal Parlor, Ghosts, Seances, and Tales of True Hauntings. And the reason it's my favorite, it's the most recent book that I've written, and it's my favorite because it's kind of like the book that I wanted to write when I first started writing, and I started with the Book of the Bizarre, because when I first pitched the Book of the Bizarre, I wanted it to be a book of ghost stories. And I believe I actually said, I'd like to write a book of ghosts for Halloween. And the publisher was like, I don't know, that sounds a little too seasonal. And so I was like, well, what if it was like, and so we worked on like a few different ideas, and this idea of like freaky facts, and they really liked that, and that did really well. But I always wanted to have a book that was a little bit more just about like ghosts and hauntings. But at the time in particular, especially with it being my first book, there's just a lot of books like that out there, and there still are. But I didn't want it to just be a collection of ghost stories. I wanted it to be like my collection of ghost stories, in that I also wanted to explore, like that spiritualist history, like we were talking about the psychic arts. I honestly think there could be a whole book just about women in the psychic arts and how that really altered the history of women in general, and how the psychic arts affected women's history. because it really did. And it's kind of not like women's history buffs don't really address that so much. And
No, they don't.
people who are really into the psychic arts don't necessarily think about how revolutionary that was for women to not be wearing like corsets and freaking scrubbing floors. It really was a huge deal. And it's, I mean, I'm not saying no, I'm the only person that realizes that, but like it's not made into as big of a deal as it really should be.
But it should be, because it's kind of who we are and where we are now. Okay, but I say this especially in this day and age. I never liked history. I never really got involved in history. As I've gotten older, it's so important, I believe now, for us to know history, because we know where we're coming from. We know the mistakes that are made back in history. So, if you're just going to keep repeating the same mistakes over and over and over again. But if we have a true account of what's happened with history, we can take a look at that and learn. We really can. I believe that anyway.
Well, there's also just like so many more cool stories. Like there's I have chapter 3 in here is dedicated to these women, and I didn't even put them all in, and I didn't even put their full stories in. And I think I have time to tell you like this one kind of I've talked with this
go ahead.
Oh, go ahead.
I'm just closing my laptop because it keeps dinging. Go ahead. Sorry.
Oh yeah, no. I think we've talked about this story a little bit, but I have to tell you, like, I found out a little bit of like additional information. So
okay,
it's along these lines. But this is one of the reasons I think that this book really could go, like, this could be its own book. But before I say that, I just want to say why the other reason that this book is my favorite is because it kind of had this like really magical thing happen that I cannot take credit for at all. And that's the main reason it's my favorite book. So I thought I'm going to talk to all of these really awesome people that have had me on their shows over the years that have asked me to be their guests and asked me ghost stories, etc. And I'm going to, and they're like paranormal podcasts, whatever, investigators and stuff. And I'm going to ask them to tell me a ghost story.
Oh, I love it.
And so, oh, can't hear me?
I can hear you.
Oh, okay. Hear you. Yeah. So I did that thinking I'm going to just have a chapter in there that's like their ghost stories.
I love it.
Chapter that's like my ghost stories. And meanwhile, I had kind of started arranging how I wanted the chapters. And so I knew I was going to have a chapter like that was like, okay, this one was like some children and this one was like hospitals and ... And so one by one, I just like, so what I did is I super old fashioned journalist style, I called each person and I had them, or in a couple, I guess I had to, did I see anyone in person? I think I had to call everyone. So I called each person and I had them tell me the story. And I just wrote it down and then I typed it up and then I sent it to them. And then I said, if there's anything that's not right, let me know. And then sometimes I called them back or whatever. So, they approved the story and they went in there. And I kind of did that because I wanted there to be like a nice cohesive voice in there as well. So it was kind of like as told to. And one by one, as the stories came in, they fit the categories. So I had chosen this story that was, so also in the book are some of like my favorite like ghost stories, like not just paranormal stories of people's experiences, but like short little ghost stories that I'd always loved. And one was this really wonderful story that takes place in Paris. And it's all about this like guy who kind of stumbles into this woman's flat that is his friend's aunt, and they're just supposed to stay there for a couple of days. And it turns out that she has this like secret room that is like this ritual room, and he just describes it in this great detail. And I knew I wanted to include it because this was this really kind of unusual story, and it was written by this man who was an architect, but he had this like side penchant for writing horror. So, so that's why I included it, because it's this really, really architecturally rich description of an altar. and like in the turn of the century of a, like a ritualistic altar. It's just really beautiful in Paris on this, like, you know, this back alley. And so I called someone up, and Jeff Bellinger gives me this story, and it's this Jeff Belanger. I always get his last name wrong. Anyway, he gives me this story, and it's a story that takes place in Paris. So I was like, okay, I'm going to put that one in there. And then my friend Hunter Shea gives me a story about a ghost, and he's a podcast host, and also he writes wonderful horror stories. And so he tells me the story about this child ghost that used to appear. His wife was very sick, and he used to see this ghost go through their house, and it was a child, and she used to see it, but they never talked about it until after years. Like, I think after she was feeling better, and they talked about it. And I had this whole section about a ghost when I was a child, and it was a child ghost. And so there's a whole child ghost section. And one by one, these stories started appearing, and they were appearing in the places. And I was like, this is just crazy. Like, this is crazy. Joe Diamond sent me a story about haunted tarot cards into this section that was all about like tarot. It was just like, this is just crazy. So
it was meant to be written.
That is why that is my favorite book, because that book had its own idea about how it was supposed to be written. And it wasn't entirely easy to write, but when that happened, I just felt really good. I was like, this is the first time that that's really happened. And I had that kind of like those chills where I was like, this is the, you know. And then actually when I sent it to the publisher, they said, we have to cut some of it. And I was like, well, I'll cut one little bit. It's longer. It's actually like 20,000 words longer than it was contracted for. And I was like, you don't understand. It wrote itself. Like,
yeah.
And the editor was wonderful. She's like, I get it. Like, I understand what you're saying. Can you maybe she made a suggestion. I was like, perfect suggestion. Let's cut that. Okay. So yeah, she was down for the magic part. She was just like, you're way over count though. Like,
no,
you cut some.
I get what you're saying. Like, when something happens, and like you said, it wasn't easy to write, but like, I think you just hit the nail on the head. It wrote itself. Like, as you wrote a section, and then, you know, a story would come in to supplement it just perfectly. Like,
it was very affirming. It was like, thank you. Oh, that's so nice. Thank you. Okay. All right. I guess I'll finish it. I guess I'll get it in on time. And I actually was like not nearly as stressed for the deadline as every other book I had ever written.
Because Carrie, I hope I get this right. She was talking, so Carrie first says, friends and I saw fairies, light bodies last July, and the goddess / Artemis Forest going up to Magdalene's Cave Grotto in Saint Baume in Provence. And she said, women. Yeah, then she, Carrie, where you have the most interesting comments here. And you know what? Normally I ask a lot more questions, but Varla is on here. Well, I have you on about at least 4 times a year usually, or try to, because Del started that. And we get talking. We could talk for hours, because you've got incredible comments here.
Yes, women like Madame Blavatsky and Theosophy. Yes, absolutely. And there's like so many. And what I found as I was kind of like researching, so I didn't even really get into Madame Blavatsky, to be honest with you, because
I don't think I know who she is.
Well, so she was one of the founding women of Theosophy. And that's sort of, so one of the women I do get into was a member of the Theosophical Society, and that's Ida Craddock. And the Theosophical Society was sort of they were a religious sect, but they were really kind of more about enlightenment. And the cool thing about the Theosophical Society is that they also subscribe to sort of like a lot of Eastern philosophies. And so they were also like frequently open to like Eastern ideas about sexuality. So Ida Craddock was like this really interesting woman who was like kind of a sex educator. And she was also a member of the Theosophical Society and a member of like several different, like she was like really into like Tantra and yoga. And like the 1800s. Okay.
Wow.
Yes, in like Chicago, and she was like a sex educator. She's a really interesting story.
Well before her
So,
time.
well before her time. And a lot of these people who were members of this, men and women, were open-minded, and they were also abolitionists, they were spiritualists, they were suffragists. So they were kind of
Wow.
like, liberally minded, and were often kind of pushing for, so you'd have people like Madame Blavatsky, and you'd have like Frederick Douglass, and they would be like appearing at these they'd be like hosted at these fancy people's houses at salons. And one night it might be Madame Blavatsky, and another night it might be the Fox sisters, and another night it might be some kind of other person who was talking about forwarding women's rights or whatever. So you'd have like a lot of people moving in the same circles.
Okay.
But Blavatsky was like, she could like go into trance and channel. And Craddock had she is like amazing. So I barely even got into her story in my book, and I barely even got into Blavatsky. So I guess my point is, I have like this whole list of stories, and that is actually one of my goals. It's only March, so actually technically it's the beginning of the year, right? Because it's just like spring now, right?
Right.
So one of my goals
is to fiscal year starts April 1st.
Yeah, right? So one of my goals here, that's part of what I'm trying to do with my soon to actually exist podcast, is just these stories that I didn't have room to actually write them all out.
Right.
That I think are, long enough to tell, including Ida Craddock's story and all of these other amazing stories that like, there's just like not enough time to even like get into it, to tell them in these like 30-minute story podcasts that are basically just like whatever. Varla Ventura tells you a story about a badass woman, basically. Yeah.
I love it. You're almost out of time. You have to come back again. We've got so much more to talk to you about.
I know. There's so much more. I feel that that will happen. Yes.
I hope so, because every time, and you know what? Thank you. Carrie, you've had these great comments. Dave, you always do. I want to give a shout out to everybody, because a lot of people go on my Facebook profile. I can't see your comments till after. But where can they find you, Varla? Because every time I have you on here, we never do the same show twice, ever.
No. And we never have a plan. I just want to say that we never have a plan, because even if we did, we wouldn't stick to it. So there we go.
Too much stuff to talk about.
Yeah. You can find me at varlaventura.net, or you can find me on Facebook, just Varla Ventura. My website has all of my book links and other things like that. And then I have a store on there with cool stuff like mugs with my logo.
I love that when you had the onesie with Changeling on the front.
Oh yeah.
Oh my God,
Changeling
that was so
onesies.
Facebook link too. Okay, Carrie. So I know that if you see on Facebook, because you're on Facebook watching this, you read the write-up for this, because I have a banner.
Oh, I see. She's in it. I get what you're asking. I'm not. We're doing it through a different format, so that's why I see.
Yeah. So, but if you look, her website's on there, and if you just look for your name on Facebook, right? Varla Ventura.
Yeah. If you look for my name on Facebook, I can try and go on after this and put links, but we're not actually we're not on Facebook right now.
You won't be able
even
to
though
see.
It looks
yeah,
like
we can't
are.
Comment on here.
Yeah.
But or
maybe
your links are on your website though, aren't they, Varla? I'm sure they are, aren't they?
Yes, my links are on my website, varlaventura.net. Yeah, I don't think.
And it's also on the write-up for the banner, because I posted this probably in about 100 different places all over the place.
Yeah,
I'm serious. It takes me about 2 hours before a show, and I post it every social media platform. It's even on Getter. I
don't even know what that is. I'm so impressed.
Yeah, everywhere. Well, I do that because Carrie, I don't think we've seen you. You've just been kind of hiding out in the shadows. You had some interesting questions. Dave, you had some great feedback. Anybody else that's listening or watching this, thank you. And people share it and they'll see it and hear it. And anybody that wants to hear the replay, I always forget to mention this, that you can hear it on anywhere where there's podcasts or talk radio like SoundCloud, iTunes, Spreaker, Spotify, you name it. If you ever want to get a hold of me, you can get a hold of me on facebook.com/The Angel Rock. You want to book a reading, I do mentoring, I do healing work. I have 2 groups on Facebook, Paranormal University for all things paranormal, and Angel Rocker Tribe for many of the things we're talking about tonight. I will tell you, next week we have a return guest who is extremely interesting, little bit of a different field than Varla. He's coming to us from Australia. Paul Anthony Wallace will be here next week talking about his new book, the 3rd in his series. So believe me, you guys won't want to miss that one either. We're going to be talking ETs and UFOs and all kinds of interesting stuff like that. Anyway, Varla, thank you so much. I love having you here.
Thank you so much for having me. I so appreciate it. So nice to see you and talk with you.
Yes, you too. So thank you to everybody here for the great comments and joining in. Like I said, we usually have a little bit more interaction, but like I said, Varla and I get talking and it just happens. Anyways,
yes,
I send you
so appreciate the comments though. Yes.
Absolutely. So good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you may be. We send you much love and light. I'll see you next week, same time, same space. Thanks again, Varla.
Thank you.